So let's talk about hierarchical clustering. Some of you may have heard of this stuff before because I gave a talk on hierarchical clustering here last semester. But today I want to focus on a little different, I want to tell you about slightly different problems, some old formulations of hierarchical clustering, some newer ones, how they connect, and tell you kind of more of a hardness result and some connections to other problems do not have to do with clustering, but rather they have to do with ordering data points on the line. So let's start with a little bit of motivation. The first thing, perhaps one thinks when they hear hierarchical clustering, has to do with phylogenetics. It's one of the early applications of hierarchical clustering, and here is what people call the tree of life, where we have different organisms at the kind of at the periphery of this kind of like a circle that it looks. And this tree is a tree actually, and it describes how different organisms are related to each other. Just by looking at it, we can get a lot of information for how different species, if they're they are close together or if they're far apart. The point in time when the lowest common ancestor first appeared, and other information like that. Now, for us, hierarchical clustering would just be a decomposition of n items of interest into a tree that has n leaves, and there will be one-to-one correspondence between the leaves and the objects of interest. And hierarchical clustering, there was a talk also yesterday by Sanjay Gupta, where he mentioned some of the advantages that hierarchical clustering has over standard clustering techniques. And one of them has to do with kind of visualizing the whole data set at different levels of granularity. Another one has to do with the fact that there's no need to initialize with a parameter k, like in k-means or k-median. And another good thing about it is that there are many simple heuristics to construct hierarchies. So it's kind of one of the when you are given a data set, it's one of the first things you try. Just build a hierarchy, try to understand the data set. Now, I just want to give you a more recent example of hierarchical clustering that has to do with next strain. So here you can go online and you can check how COVID virus evolved. And the types of structures we get are these kind of binary trees, or sometimes they have a higher fan out in each branch. And if you zoom in, you can see how different kind of types of viruses appear and how they are related. Okay, so these are the kinds of structures that we're interested in. And perhaps the oldest example is, I think it's a cool story, that's why I'm saying it again, perhaps you have heard it, is the fact that Darwin, when he was a young student, maybe 22, 23, he visited the Galapagos Islands and he saw two types of turtles. And these types of turtles were, one of them had short neck, the other had long neck. And he came up with the idea that perhaps they're related. Sometimes in the past they had a common ancestor. And he came up with his idea about evolution, which he has in his book on the origin of species. And this is the kind of the only figure in his book. And it's a figure of a hierarchical clustering. And he writes expressions like, between A and B, we have an immense gap of relation. Between C and B, finest gradation. Between B and D, rather greater distinction. Okay. So this kind of just to have some examples in mind about why hierarchical clustering is important and why it has applications. And I mentioned a lot of phylogenetics because some problems that we will see later, they were actually first formulated in phylogenetics. And I thought it was nice to have these applications in mind. Now, when I tell you hierarchical clustering, and you're given a data set, you're trying to do a hierarchical clustering on it, the first thing that perhaps you think about is, what is an objective, an optimization objective that we try to optimize for? For example, Liren before told us about k-means or k-medians or k-center. These are all objectives that work for flat clustering. And the idea is here that we have to build a hierarchy. So the first, the object that we're trying to find is a tree on n data points. The question is, what are the optimization objectives that we should care about? And this question actually has been kind of mentioned in several books because hierarchical clustering is an important data analysis tool. And they, for example, they mentioned that there is a lack of global objectives, and this is one of the key issues in hierarchical clustering. Another reason why having objectives is important is because we can score algorithms. We can understand the performance of algorithms based on a score that we assign to the output. So, for example, this book says that if we run 3 different algorithms on the same data set, we will get these 3 different trees. And the question is, which one is better? So we would like to have a k-means style objective that tells us, oh, this tree is better than the other. And kind of this concludes the introduction. I don't know if there are any questions so far. Let me pause for maybe 5 seconds if someone on the Zoom wants. By the way, should I let me increase the volume in case something is speaking. This kind of summarizes the motivation and the beginning of the talk. Now I want to tell you about some objectives for hierarchical clustering, kind of addressing these obstacles about having an objective. And I'll tell you about some kind of older formulation and some newer formulations for hierarchical clustering and how they are related. Then I will describe a Hardness result that I really like, plus followed by a conjecture that, I'll try to convince you that it's reasonable. Then I want to describe a simple planted model where we have ground truth solution and an algorithm based on max cut. And then I will conclude with some open questions. Feel free to interrupt any time. So now for simplicity, let's assume we have this example where it's a hierarchical clustering of 5 data points. And I picked this image so that you can easily understand, if this is the correct hierarchy or the wrong hierarchy. So in this case, let's assume that we care about how animals relate to each other. So we have the 2 rabbits on one side of the tree. Then we have animals that are related to the sea. Some penguins, a dolphin, okay. So you would like to say that this is a good tree, given our understanding of the species. Right? On the other hand, you would like to say that this mixed up tree that I kind of changed is a bad tree. And perhaps, if I ask you why is a bad tree, maybe you can tell me that it seems that there are lots of mistakes on not pair of points, because 2 points, they will start together at the root of the tree, but then they will get separated at the end of the tree. But rather, there are lots of mistakes on triplets of points. So, for example, if you look at the 2 rabbits and a dolphin, we see that the lowest common ancestor between the rabbit on the left and the dolphin is much lower in the tree. And this doesn't make sense, right? Because kind of we understand that the 2 rabbits should be together without the dolphin somewhere in the tree. And this brings me to kind of an older formulation of hierarchical clustering, which is based on triplets of points. This is a book by Fezenstein, if I read it correctly. It's in Inferring Phylogenies, and it has kind of many problems on. It takes kind of a more computational biologist perspective on phylogenetics, but there are many interesting problems for computer scientists to look at in this book. And one of them has to do exactly with this idea of basing our understanding of hierarchical clustering based on triplets. So what do I mean by triplet? Imagine we have data points A, B, C. And what biologists do in order to understand which of the two are more related is they perform an experiment. Maybe they check the genetic code of A, the genetic code of B, genetic code of C, and then based on the ATCG stuff, they can understand if the organisms are related to each other and which one is the closest there. So in this case, if we have the two penguins and the rabbit, the ideal triplet that we would like to see is the one shown here, and this specifies a mini hierarchy on 3 data points. And what we want is after we collect m triplets on the data set, and think of m, maybe 1,000 or something for a data set of n, maybe 100 points or something. We want to find the tree that maximizes the number of, I say, satisfied triplets. Okay, this is a very natural objective. It goes under the name of triplet reconstruction or rooted triplets consistency. There are even not generalizations that in different settings, biologists care about quartet reconstruction based on 4 tuples of items. And the idea when I say find the tree that maximizes the number of satisfied constraints means that if I give you a bunch of triplets, you would like to find a global tree, like on the whole data set, such that the lowest common ancestor of the, let's say, of the penguins in the tree is lower than the lowest common ancestor between the penguin and the rabbit. Okay, so it just means that the penguins are more closely together in the tree. And on purpose, I have this tree here that is the wrong one, and so that it annoys you in some sense. Because here I have one of the penguins being closer to the rabbit.
Does it matter how over it is?
Yeah, no, that's the point, that we only care about the relative, the relative order of separation in some sense. If you give me 3 points, at some point in the tree, there is the first point that one of them got split. And this, we can call it the outsider. In this case, it's the rabbit. The outsider is the rabbit. So, and this kind of a vanilla version of triplet reconstruction. Now, a quick observation. This is a simple problem. I mean, it's simple to state. It's very natural. Perhaps before going to this, you can think of these triplet constraints. Maybe in a flat clustering setting, you would have a pairwise constraint that says, maybe me and Liren were the same. We should be in the same cluster. And maybe me and Pat should be in a different cluster. And we want to classify to cluster us in case clusters, so that we satisfy these pairwise constraints. Now, in this setting, pairwise constraints don't make sense, so we go to triplets. And the quick observation is that a random tree, if you try to maximize the number of triplets that you satisfy, already a random tree will get you a 1/3 approximation. This is similar to max cut. The random split will give you 1 for every x. The idea is simple. Basically, there are only 3 possible ways of splitting 3 data points. You either chop off the rabbit or the 3 penguins or the other penguins. So random will equally choose any of these, and you can sum up all these contributions, and you will get 1/3 of the total. And yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering, if you're given all triple information about all triple,
right?
Can you actually construct this tree?
Right. So there are 2 settings. One is the case where you have consistent triplets. Actually, the problem is easy in the perfect setting where the triplets are consistent. So you can find the tree that satisfies all of them. The interesting thing is that when sometimes the measurements you did they have some noise. It's kind of UGC style when you are 1 minus epsilon from the. So when you don't have perfect completeness, the problem becomes hard to get exactly right. If you have all n-3 triplets, there are p-tasses and things like that. So you can get close to.
But it also tells you the tree.
Yeah. If you have them, you can. You can find them.
And how fast are those algorithms in the perfect information case? Like if a tree
the
exists,
perfect information.
the tree exists that satisfies 100%.
Yeah. It's kind of a recursive connectivity algorithm. So I would say something. Actually, Monica Henziger has a paper. I think the best bound so far. Maybe something like n times square root of the number of triplets or something. Maybe the other way. Number of triplets times square root. Yeah.
She's on the Zoom call. She can respond.
Really? Okay. Yeah. The algorithm is very simple, and it goes back to the 80s by Aho. And the motivation actually for these triplets in computer science came also from databases, because the way you do joins in databases somehow it's related. And now it turns out, surprisingly perhaps, that this is the best algorithm we have so far for this problem in the worst case. Okay, so this simple random tree, of course you can de-randomize, you can come up with some greedy techniques, but this is the best we have so far. And later today we will see some reasons why this happens, and the conjecture is related to this. Okay, so I'll put kind of this older formulation on the left. Now I want to switch gears to a newer hierarchical clustering objective that was defined by Sanjoy Gupta in 2016. And the difference here is that we have pairwise similarities on the data set. So in the previous setting, we just had triplets. Someone just did the experiments and gave us triplets. Here, we assume, because a lot of data sets, you can compute similarities between pairs of items. We would like to obtain an objective that is based on pairwise similarities. And here, the larger the weight, the larger the number is, the larger the similarity between the endpoints. So the two penguins have the highest similarity. Okay. And the Scooter had this idea that on how to formulate a hierarchical clustering objective, where you specify the cost of a tree as the sum over all pairs of points, the weight of the edge times the lowest common ancestor of this of I and j. And let me show you an example so that you understand why this makes sense. So the lowest common ancestor between the 2 points here that I specified, again, this is the wrong tree, so that it's a little bit annoying to look at it. But the lowest common ancestor here for the penguin and the rabbit is 2, because there are only 2 data points kind of hanging below this tree. But if you go up and you pick 2 other data points, the 2 penguins, for example, here, the lowest common ancestor has size 5, which is, in general, it will be n, the number of data points. And the reason for this is that, again, if you look at the leaves, the number of leaves that are hanging out from this internal node, there are 5 leaves. There are 5 data points, so that's what we say, the size of LCA. And the reason why we try to, the intuition behind this objective is that LCA should be very high for points that are that have a low WHA. Okay, so that you're not penalized a lot. And this kind of actually 3 years ago, I remember in TTIC there was a whole workshop on clustering, and then there were 3-4 talks about hierarchical clustering. And this kind of ignited the line of research with maybe much interest both from theoreticians and from more applied people. And today, just for it's easier, some of the deductions become easier. I want to tell you about the complement of the Gupta's cost, which was shortly defined by Mosley 1. I didn't do anything too crazy here. I just, instead of thinking of cost about the tree, I'm thinking of the reward of the tree and try to maximize it. And this is just the summation of Wij of n minus the lowest common answer. So I just kind of flip the objective and we try to maximize. And now for this objective, one of the nice things was that average linkage gets a 1/3 approximation. So average linkage, I didn't tell you what it is, but it's a very popular technique for hierarchical clustering. And kind of perhaps, I don't know, bad news associated with this was that also a random algorithm will get, a random tree again will be a 1/3 approximation. Okay. So now we have, so far from what I've told you, we have these objectives. On the left, the triplets, random gets 1/3, and on the right, this other objective, and we get 1/3 again. And, it's natural to ask, can we do better for this objective? Actually, why is random 1/3? Actually, just one comment. This term that is the confusing part of the objective, n minus the LCA, we can rewrite it as just an indicator of whether another vertex k is not in the LCA of Ij. And this goes back to the triplet formulation. Because if between Ij and k, there is 1/3 probability for k not being the LCA. So it's not. And actually, for this objective, we were able to slightly beat random. So in the beginning, we had the 0.336 approximation. And then shortly after, we improved it to 42 using max uncut bisection. And then later, from to the best of my knowledge, the best so far is by Alon, Azar, and Weinstein, which they analyze the max uncut bisection in a different way. It's a very elegant analysis, and they get close to 58%. Oops. Yeah. So the story so far goes that on the right, we have these pairwise objectives, and they seem to be strictly easier than the triplet construction. And we would like to understand why in the triplet construction there hasn't been improved. So that's what I want to tell you a bit more about, unless there are any questions, of course, or in the Zoom. I hope they can hear. Perfect. So we'll actually start with the conjecture, and then I will kind of instantiate it in several forms. So the conjecture is that we cannot beat random for the triplet reconstruction problem. So the 1/3 is optimal. And this is something, whenever you cannot beat the random algorithm, again, here I mean we cannot beat random in the not perfect instances or, in a general instance. And whenever you cannot beat random, there is this idea of approximation resistance that certain problems, certain constraint satisfaction problems, simply, outputting a random solution is the best you can do unless P equals NP or unless UGC breaks and things like that. And that's the conjecture. So let me try to convince you why I believe it. Okay, first, I will prove later that we cannot get a 2/3 approach. There's a question.
Sorry, this is the first objective, right?
This is the just triplets reconstruction. So when I give you a bunch of triplets, it's there are no sort of similarities, just triplets. The thing we can actually prove for this triplet reconstruction problem is that we cannot get a 2/3 approximation. So there's a gap between 1/3 and 2/3. And this unless P equals P. And, some evidence that perhaps the conjecture should be true in general is that this 1/3 ratio is tied for caterpillar trees. So what is a caterpillar tree? It's just a tree where at every internal node, you remove one leaf at every point. Okay, so every internal node in Caterpillar tree has a child that is a leaf. So this is tight for caterpillars. And also, we can actually show the tight result, the approximation resistance, for a very related problem that biologists have studied that's called the forbidden triplets. Forbidden triplets just mean instead of giving you a triplet that you want to include in the tree, I give you a triplet that you want to avoid in your tree. Okay, so this is called the forbidden triplets, and this we know. We can get a similar hardness for quartets. This is another problem mentioned. Again, the best so far for the quartet reconstruction is 1/3, and we don't know exactly how to. We don't have tight hardness for this. And the idea for the proof that I want to show you next is going through some problems on the line, as I mentioned in the very first slide, that are called ordering constraint satisfaction problems. And this goes back to Guruswamy, Hastad, Manokaran, Raghavendra, and Sarika. This is a journal. There's a question.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe I should ask this earlier. So this is wondering, so Dasgupta's, the mostly Wang objective, you said it's a special case, right?
Yeah, it's a special case. And it is.
What kind of special case again?
There is a reduction where, a special case, I mean that whatever approximation you can get for the triplets, in general, you can get also for.
No, but the triplets correspond to all triplets. Is there like a specific?
Just any list of triplets.
The triplets problem is just you are given m triplets. Let's think of m that it's not n cubed, so it's kind of n squared or something, or anything less. The Mosley Wang, it becomes a special case of the triplets, where for every pair of points, we will have Wij. I will create a triplet instance now. I insert all triplets of the form, let's say Vaggos Chatziafratis / anyone else. So we create n-2 triplets with the same weight, doesn't matter. And then whatever tree you create for Mosley Wang, it has the same objective.
But this hardness doesn't extend to that too?
No, it doesn't extend because the instances have special structure in the. So, I don't know if. I think we could live in a world where both of them have a 58% approximation, and we don't know it yet. Yeah. Because my hardness is only 66%. So.
Why does the type 1/3 hardness for caterpillar trees not mean that it's just 1/3? What does that mean?
The what?
So here you say that there's type 1/3 hardness for caterpillar trees. So why does that not mean that, don't you just need to find one bad example?
The caterpillar trees just mean that I also restrict the optimal, I look only caterpillar trees.
Oh.
So if you're constrained to output a caterpillar tree, then we know it's tight, but in general, you can output a balanced tree. Yeah, so let me just give you some of the ideas about the proof. Let's say, okay. So for triplets reconstruction, we cannot get more than 2/3 approximation. The main reduction is from an ordering problem called non-betweenness. Now, some of you may have worked, I know Vaggos Chatziafratis and you have worked on this problem. Or betweenness, yeah. So let me tell you what is the non-betweenness. You will see the connection at a high level, and then I will tell you the kind of reduction. So in a non-betweenness instance, we're again given triplet constraints, but now we want to output an ordering of the points, so like a permutation. So you want to output a permutation by star that maximizes the number of constraints. And what does it mean to satisfy constraint? So if the do I have it here? Okay. So if the constraint was this penguin rabbit, basically we say that the third node, that's the node by C, or the rabbit in this case, should not be in between the two penguins in the permutation. Does that make sense? So the rabbit should not kind of separate the two penguins on the ordering, in the ordering. So for example, this would be a bad ordering because the rabbit actually separates the two penguins. This would also be a bad ordering because rabbit also separates them. But then this would be good, okay, because the rabbit is on the rightmost point in the permutation. This would also be good. Actually, there are two more good configurations. In general, here we don't care about being consecutive. So, if I give you a permutation and you just focus on these three data points, A, B, and C, you just care that C is either the rightmost or the leftmost. And if you do the combinations, there are 6 permutations, and the random solution will get a 2/3 approximation for this problem. There are 4 good permutations and 2 bad. And this is tight. That's the Gurus-Van result that you cannot do. And actually, the result is slightly stronger, the Gurus-Van result. It says that even if, they tell you that if I give you an instance of the non-betweenness problem, you cannot separate between the case where you have high objective, like 1 minus epsilon, is normalized. So, it's a case where 1 minus epsilon fraction of the constraints are satisfied versus a case which is a no instance in which the optimal permutation only satisfies, let's say, 2/3 plus epsilon, and pick epsilon whatever you want. I can construct an instance that the gap is hard to tell. And for the triplet problem, we can get, using this result now, we can get a similar reduction, a similar gap instance, where the yes instance, we're going to have a triplet reconstruction problem where the value of the tree is more than 1/2 minus epsilon, right? And the no instance is less than 2, 1/3. 1/3. Right? Yeah. And then the gap between these instances is 2/3, and that's what we will get. 2/3 out. Yeah, okay, epsilon prime will be, if we start with the instance on the left, which is the non-betweenness, the non-betweenness instance, and we get the reduction will spit out another triplet reconstruction instance with these parameters. And the reduction is actually pretty simple once you kind of know and understand what you want. For every non-betweenness constraint that was given in the input, I will just create kind of the same semantically constraint where you want to separate the outsider of the non-betweenness constraint, in which case the rabbit. Okay. So for every constraint, for every non-betweenness constraint on the left, just create a triplet that kind of corresponds to that. And let's focus first in the yes case. The yes case is easier. So what do we want to show? We want to show that if a good permutation exists in the non-betweenness instance, there will also be a good tree. Okay. And then it turns out that if there's a good permutation on the left that satisfies many of the non-betweenness constraints, then the tree, I can construct a tree which is very simple. It's actually caterpillar in this case. And it's either the caterpillar tree that puts the leaves according to the permutation or the reverse of the permutation. Okay. Oh, sorry. So either either I put the leaves as they appear in the permutation. You can check this here. Or the reverse order. Okay. And it's not hard to see that either one of them, not either the correct order, the forward order or the backward order will satisfy at least 1/2. Okay. So this is kind of the yes case. Now the no case we will go for a contradiction that says, let's assume that the value of the tree is higher than 1/3 plus 2 epsilon, and I will construct a permutation that has more than 2/3. And this would contradict the fact that we are in a no case for the non-between system. So here the main observation is that if a triplet is satisfied in the tree, just by projecting onto a line, what do I mean by this? I just mean, no, just look at your tree and just let the leaves fall. This will, on a line, or this will create an ordering. And it's easy to see that if a triplet is satisfied in the tree, then also the projection on the line will satisfy the constraints as a non-betweenist constraint. So for example, here, we just let the leaves fall, and the rabbit is actually the rightmost. Okay. It could also be the leftmost, it doesn't matter. But it's important that we satisfy. Now, this is not enough for us because it only tells us that the permutation will satisfy 1/3 plus 2 epsilon, which is the value that the tree star satisfied. We can actually do slightly better. So where are we going to get this extra satisfied triplets? Well, let's see here. Yeah. Now the idea is that even if a triplet is violated in the tree, so like the one here where the rabbit is kind of closer to the penguin, anyway, the rabbit is in the wrong place in this tree. As I'm projecting onto the line, I can just randomly swap the left and right children of this tree, right? The tree doesn't change because in the tree we don't care about, it's just defined based on the lowest common answer. So I can just project, sorry. But now the permutation is fixed because rabbit is the leftmost now, and we satisfy the non-between constraint. So we're going to get with probability 1/2 whatever we violated as well. And this is, if you do the calculation, you get 1/3 from the satisfied triplets in the tree, plus 1/2 of the remaining 2/3. And that's what gives it. So this is a simple reduction. The good thing is that, you know, a similar approach gives us the tight approximation threshold for forbidden triplets. So for forbidden triplets, it's another problem studied in biology. We know that it is approximation resistant. And similar reductions can also give us quartet reconstruction, a lower bound. So this is what we prove. Okay, let me see. Okay, maybe I have 5 more minutes. I'll go quickly through the planted model. Are there any questions?
Right. Maybe this is what forbidden triplets is about, but what about the minimization problem? Is there any polynomial?
No. Minimization. The forbidden triplet is still maximization. Just I give you triplet that you want to avoid in your tree, and you try to maximize the number of avoided triplets. Okay. Minimization. Yeah, I didn't want to mention it too much. Minimization is also interesting.
In fact, it seems more interesting considering Das-Gupta's objections.
Right. So for minimization, the approximation algorithms we have are still bad. I think the best, like for minimizing the number of violated triplets, the best is an N approximation, where N is the number of data points, and it is based on minimum cut recursively. So it's a simple algorithm. Minimum cut on a suitably defined graph. The thing is that there is at least the worst case, there is a lower bound that says that under some complex theoretic assumption that you cannot get something like 2 to the n to the 1 minus epsilon. So there is a lower bound. Yeah. So you cannot hope for poly. Yeah, that's a good question. It's a nice problem for beyond worst case analysis. Which what I was planning to say now. So I want to describe you a simple planted ground truth model and kind of how we can beat this random 1/3. Wow. So in biology and maybe in many data science applications, we think that there is a ground truth that we want to find, right? So Perhaps these worst case instances are very pathological. So here we would like to assume that there is a ground truth tree and that we have access to it maybe through experiments. And then we would like to construct a better solution that gets better than 1/3, which is the baseline. So our planned ground truth model is the following. So we will generate n constraints as follows. We will just pick 3 random elements, A, B, and C, and we will query the tree. We assume we have some kind of a measurement process. We will query the tree about who is the outsider. So if we asked about 2 rabbits and a penguin, then the oracle would spit out with probability 1 minus theta that this is the correct tree, and with probability that would give any other tree out of the. And this this planned ground model has been studied before, but it was studied for quartets. And the theorem is that we can bit random and we can get something like 60% minus some function of theta out of this a fraction of the total number of triplets that we give. Okay, I just want to show one picture about the analysis. The idea is to use max-cut on a graph that has both plus and minus weights. And then we will follow it by random flip. Okay, and perhaps this can be improved. Okay, this will be very quick. Imagine I give you this triplet. The idea is that we construct a weighted graph that has plus and minus edges. And we would like to find the max cut in this graph that we will construct. So imagine for every triplet, we see who is the outsider. In this case, it's the penguins. And the penguins is connected with the 2 rabbits with a +1 edge, whereas the 2 rabbits that we don't want to separate are connected with a minus edge. And we do this for every triplet in the instance, in the input. And we create kind of a multi-graph that is both plus and minus, as blue. Yeah. And then in this graph, we will get a max cut in this graph. And we have to understand the relation between the graph cut and the types of constraints it satisfies. And basically, there are 4 cases for a cut with respect to one particular triplet. Either it separates the outsider, is the first case where we score a +2, because we cut +2 edges. Or we do something wrong. These are the 2 middle cases where we're penalized by -1, so the cut has -1. Or the cut didn't affect this triplet, so we say that the triplet is unaffected, and the cut has zero gains. And now the idea is that the weight of the cut kind of tells us that if we do this for every triplet, the weight of the cut is equal to 2 times the number of satisfied triplets minus the number of violated triplets. And we can use this just a one-line computation where if we were to run this algorithm that is max cut followed by random splitting tree, we will get, I'll skip the calculation. Basically, look at the last derivation, we'll get 1/3 of m, this is the total number of constraints, plus 1/3 of the weight of the cut. So we already beat random. You can see that you can beat the 1/3 by this, as long as the weight of the cut is large, and this is what we also have to prove. Okay. I don't want to tell you this idea with the triangles. And basically this concludes. I think I have 2 more minutes. If there are any questions, I can proceed with some. Perfect. Okay, so what's next? Today we show some older hierarchical clustering formulations and some newer ones. And there are some open problems that follow directly from what I discussed. So one could be, can we get better algorithms for triplet or quartet reconstruction? Or is the conjecture true, that there's a hardness and we cannot bit random even for this problem? Finally, this max cut algorithm that I gave you is max cut followed by random. I don't know, perhaps there is a better ratio to be obtained by doing max cut recursively or max cut in a modified graph. Another thing that is directly related to dasgupta's and Mosley-Wang objectives has to do with can we get improved approximations for any of them. So dasgupta's objective used that the current best bounds are using sparsest cutoff balance. Can we do better? We don't know. Mosley-Wang, as I mentioned, the paper by Alon et al. Gets a 58% using max and cut bisection. Can we do better? Now, more generally, perhaps we care about hierarchical clustering also in other models of computation, like streaming hierarchical clustering, in which case data kind of arrive in a stream and then you have very limited space and you want to perform some calculations and understand what is the hierarchical clustering objectives or what is the underlying tree. And this is work that we will upload to Archive soon. This was my colleagues at Google and Serper Asadi and his student one. And finally, more broadly, this is the last slide, I would like to kind of invite you to think about hierarchical clustering in different models. For example, are there distance-based objectives that make sense and that are interesting to analyze? Maybe we can go beyond worst case analysis, beyond worst case, and understand stable instances where we care about exact recovery of the underlying tree. This would be along the lines of the paper that I've written with Yuri and Costa that they had on max cut exact recovery. A third problem would be a lot of the approaches in hierarchical clustering are going bottom up, and the question is that these are sensitive to initial merges. So can we robustify these methods? And 4 and 5, just it's kind of a broader set of problems that are asking for different models where perhaps we have overlying communities like in Facebook, or we have evolving communities over time, or other evolving communities like online hierarchical clustering and dynamic hierarchical clustering are also part. So this concludes, and thank you very much.